I want to start with the news because we had fairly big news yesterday. Dell and EMC announced they were merging. And it was at this summit exactly 1 year ago today when HP, which is in many of the same businesses that Dell and EMC are in, announced it was doing the opposite. It was splitting. Now you compete to some degree against both of them. Who's got it right?
Well, it's a good question to talk about strategy. And I think when you say who's got it right, I actually believe an important lesson is you build your own strategy. You don't define it by what another competitor is doing. And honestly, I kind of feel, I was saying to Alan, many of us have kind of been with me on this journey of transforming IBM as I've been here. This is, I think, my fourth year, right? I think so. And so, and lots of familiar faces, so I feel like we've been through this together. And when I look at the IBM of today versus those companies, I mean, our profiles are entirely different. And so you make your choice on strategy. Some people make a choice for size. I happen to not be a believer of that. You know, I've often said, especially in industries that's clamoring for growth, right? If I had wanted size, I wouldn't have divested $8 billion of businesses.
And in fact, IBM has been getting
by design. I mean, and so just because currency, you wouldn't go divest countries. And because businesses that I think are no longer about the future, you know, we've divested them. So that's the right thing. Others make a choice. And if you look at the kind of image between the announcement yesterday and us, that's mostly a hardware announcement. We are 10% hardware. Important, but only 10%.
You used to be in all those businesses.
We were in all those businesses and made choices. And I think this is back to, I mean, one of the lessons I always keep saying, steward for the long term. That is not always easy, but you do it. You check your course, you stay on it. And this idea that for us, that long term is higher value, and we're an enterprise innovation company. And that means you have to keep transforming what you are. You don't get to be 100 years old doing the same thing. And so you've gotten in, particularly in this industry, but I think it's true for lots of people here.
So one of the things that distinguishes those two companies is that Dell is doing it in the private markets. Now, we did a survey of CEOs earlier this year, Fortune 500 CEOs, and I don't know if you responded or not, but we asked the question, could you manage your company better if you were private?
Yeah.
84% said yes. Would you be able to be a steward for the long term better if you didn't have to deal with the pressures of the public markets?
I think of that question different. As long as every decision I make it as if I was private. And I think when you look at your shareholders and you manage the company for long-term shareholders, and you manage the company for your clients, as two of the biggest stakeholders here, you will make the right decisions. Now that means, you know, and you'll do it as we've done it many times in the public eye, but you make your decisions thinking, would I make the decision, right? If it was my own money, on behalf of these people, would I do it? And that's what I think is actually the most important
And will
point.
your shareholders let you do that?
If you have, your long-term shareholders will. And back to, I think, what Warren just said a second ago about communicate. Yeah. And we've been very clear about, in technology, you have to reinvent yourself, right? And this is why, as we've reinvented ourselves, as I've talked about here, around big data, around cloud, around what we call engagement, I mean, already, those are 27% of IBM when we ended last year. They were already $25 billion in size, and in the first half grew 30%. And other business, like all of us here, have business that we do for clients that's important. While those may not be growing businesses, you have to modernize those. So you do those both. You invest for the future, you modernize your core at the same time, and I think those are two important principles, and they can be done as we are doing them, and you just have to stick to it and stay with a plan and communicate it.
So you have a great three-part mantra that you repeat to your employees, and I think I have this right. Tell me if I don't. It's don't protect the past.
Yeah.
Don't be defined by your products, and always disrupt yourself.
Yes.
And if you think small, simple statements, but if you think about that, that's almost the antithesis of what big companies did 10, 20 years ago. Bureaucracies were designed to self-perpetuate. That's a pretty disruptive message, isn't it?
Well, I think for all of us, I think it's actually the right message for all of us. I don't even think it matters about your size, and I don't think it matters about whether you're tech or not tech. This idea about, as I've talked about it here, you know, don't protect your past. We talked about selling $8 more billion of businesses. But it also, don't define yourself as a product. It means if you have, and give yourself the freedom to think about you're a solution to something, the ingredients will change. Just like for us, the ingredients have changed over time, And that was why we built some very important building blocks, as I mentioned, around cloud, around data, around mobility, around security, but they are building blocks. I mean, we should talk a little bit about where I think, and as an industry leader, where we think the whole world goes on what is the next trend here and what is the most important thing to do. But to your third one, when you said you do some things, you steward for the long term, and you make some big bets, and then you stick with them, right? And so that's what I think is, no matter what company, I think those have proven to be true, and those will prove to be true for the future as well. So this thought, Alan and I were talking about backstage, because I've thought every time I've been here, can I share something that I think is something that people can take away? And as we've been reinventing ourselves, and I think if I asked everyone here, how many of you think some part of what you do is to become a digital company? Just could you raise your hand?
Show of hands.
Okay.
It might be easier to ask, is there anybody who thinks their goal isn't to become a digital company?
In some way.
Raise their hand.
So this idea, and by the way, I agree too, and this is why we've built these foundation building blocks, and we will continue to invest in them, they will get bigger. But to me, digital, when everyone's digital, it's not a destination. It is not the destination. And last week, we had the opportunity to put what I would call a point of view about the future out on the table. And so think about when digital business marries up with what I'll call digital intelligence. We said it is the dawn of a new era about being a cognitive business. When every product, every service, how you run your company can actually have a piece that learns and thinks as part of it, you will be a cognitive business.
So the digital is just the wires, basically. You're collecting the data, and then you have to make something.
And then you take this world, when I say digital intelligence, some shorthanded to artificial intelligence. I think it's much more than that. You put those two together, and I say cognitive is both an era of technology, and it is as well a business model. So, so this thought, I would take everyone back in time. When the internet first came out, and people at first talked about browsing, I know as we were, again, reinventing ourselves, we said, it will be about more than browsing. And it led us to e-business. Yep. Then there was, you go back just not very long ago, 8, 9 years ago, you would have things like traffic you put sensors in roads, things starting to change. I know it led us to have this point of view about smarter planet. You could become a smarter business. So you became an e-business, you became, as you would say, smarter. But now, I think this next decade, it is about, can you become a cognitive business? And to me, if you take big data, cloud, mobility, this is the fourth, and I believe it is the most disruptive of these trends. It is clearly the one, you guys have been with me as Watson has grown up, right? He is symbolic of this era, and he is the first real platform of it. But that idea that I think it allows existing companies, you will be the disruptor. You will be the disruptor should you choose to do it, because it changes everything about how you operate.
So, but we have a long way to go, don't we? There was a McKinsey report that came out earlier this year that estimated that of all this data we're collecting, we're only turning about 1% of it into intelligence.
You do, but here's, I think, two phenomena, or two things to talk about on the technology side. One is that, do we have a long way to go? Yes, and that's what makes it an era. However, already here, I want you to think of a couple things. 80%, we all talk about the amount of information. That's kind of interesting. 80% of all the information in the world to date, until now, has been invisible to your systems and computers, right? It's songs, it's movies. You might store it, but you don't know what's in it. You don't understand what's in it. And so that's until now. And with the advent of technology, which I think we sort of unleashed this artificial intelligence, it's been around for decades, but with Watson unleashed it, this idea that systems that can understand, they can reason, they can learn are here. But you also have this idea, back to digital, that a lot of businesses are rewritten in code, right? Take a look. A car has 100 million lines of code in it. Mary will be here later today. This idea, you combine those, you have this new era here. And again, I'll come back to how Watson has grown up. We talked about healthcare last time. But marry it with, and this is what I think is more important when you said, is it too early? Is it early? Here's what I already see you can do with a business. And I kind of lay it out, if I can share kind of 5 areas for you to look at in your business about if you were beginning this journey to be a cognitive business. The first one, it will drive a deeper engagement with your clients than you have ever seen. Proof. Work we're doing with an insurance company. Watson's behind the scene, who knows the client, and helping, say, as the person's filling out forms, putting it in terms they understand, knowing their portfolio. Closure rate, 9 points higher than before. 9 points is enough to change an industry on some of these things. Second thing, your ability to scale expertise. If you just think of if any employee in your company could perform as the best one did. And so the US spends $156 billion a year on training in business. 90% of those skills are lost in the first year. I mean, you just don't remember them. So what if you had help? I think you will scale expertise with these systems. The third thing, you'll put learning in every product. One of my favorite, because we have a big ecosystem, is the company building children's toys. That it's a dinosaur using Watson inside, that he adapts to how your child learns, and that's how he then communicates with the child. But it'll be true for any product and service. And then as well, how you'll change the operations of your company. With someone in here, we're doing some big work on their supply chain.
You're not going to tell us who?
Supply chain. I won't tell you who, because this is a competitive advantage for everyone. 2 to 10 points higher on price, being able to higher revenue, 5 points of margin. And then the last is how you will actually do discovery. If you're a farm, it doesn't matter who you are. You pick your choices of where investment goes, it'll help there. So that's
discovery
with its pharma or new areas to go into.
Research.
Search, data. And by the way, we had just announced Thomson Reuters, thinking of this as the foundation of how they do their work in the future.
Ginni,
so we're there.
Those 5 things pretty much transform everything about every business represented in this room.
It is, and this is why I think it's a wonderful opportunity to either be instead of being disrupted, you are the disruptor. And it applies to everybody in here, and it is a journey, and you just get started on it, right? So I know I do it inside my own company as well.
Well, Watson Health. Yeah, I know. You've told me before that's your moonshot. That's the thing that gets you. Actually, it's hard to believe anything can get you more excited than you have been for the last 5 minutes. But that's the one that really gets you excited.
Well, let me look. Healthcare. How many of us, I believe you don't have to be in healthcare to care about healthcare or to have a business related to healthcare. So this is why I think it belongs to much more than this. And as Alan has said, and I think this is another thing important for all companies, I've said each one of us gets a chance, and maybe it's once or twice in a lifetime, and I've said to my team, with help of a lot of people in this room, we're going to get a chance to disrupt and to completely change the face of healthcare. It will be our moonshot. IBM had the chance to help land the man on the moon, do the first census, and this will be our moonshot now. So I've shown you saw Watson last year in oncology. This has now grown. Healthcare, $8 trillion, about $1.6 trillion of inefficiencies, and we launched a whole business now around Watson Health. And so Watson Health, but it's really important. It's a health cloud, lots of analytics, lots of data. See, now these systems, as I said, they can see things. And this is why we've done 3 acquisitions, 30 billion images, 100 million medical records. It's all to help analytics and then partners. And here's what I think is the greatest thing. Anybody related to health and wellness at all, and you and I were talking about even for Fortune, what that means. The secret sauce is going to be you take what it is you do. Almost any product's going to turn into a service. It will be based around analytics. And so some of the first companies joining us on the IBM Watson Health Cloud, obviously Apple with ResearchKit and HealthKit, Medtronic, Johnson & Johnson, who's here today, Teva, take a look at CVS. And it's all a different view of taking information they have. And as an example, I know my colleagues of J&J are here, healthy knees. How do you you're going to replace a knee, how do you turn that into an experience end to end? Part of that's analytics, part of that's much more. And this is the same idea with Medtronic. If you're going to do diabetes and a pump, and if you're a sports company with apparel, what do you do? And so it is, I think, going to be a full range, and I believe we will all get our chance. Again, the oncology part was our big grand challenge we started with, and now it's much broader.
I suspect you have raised 100 questions in the minds of people in the audience.
I hope one.
We only have time for one very quick one if somebody has one, but I hope you'll be around to talk to people because what you've said is relevant to everybody sitting here. Anybody have one very quick question?
Good one.
Putting too much pressure on them. Right here. Yes, go ahead.
I was going to ask a more personal question. I saw an article recently where you talked about the juxtaposition of growth and comfort, and that you can't really have both of those things coexisting. Maybe in the context of this conference, can you talk about what that means to women leadership?
Yeah, this is, I think, the first time I had ever really told that story publicly. How many people were still here when I told it was at this conference? How many folks were here? Okay, so about a third, right? I mean, and it was, I believe this topic of growth and comfort don't coexist. I believe in it so firmly, and I think it's true for companies, for people. I think it's true for countries. You know, you and I were talking about India and China. And in that, the story behind it, there's cliff notes for the two-thirds that didn't hear it, was very early in my career, I had been offered a very big job, and I was very uncertain about taking it. And I told the person at the time, I said, you know, I'm not ready. Let me go home and let me think about it. And I went home and I shared that story with my husband. Now my husband, same husband, 35 years. Not that, but, and as he listens, he's sitting there, you know, and he looked at me and he said, do you think a man would have answered the question that way? And I sort of stopped dead in my tracks, you know, and he said, you're always your biggest critic, you know? And he said, I know, you'll do it, you'll do fine, and you'll go on to the next. And it really hit home to me, this idea that going into something, growth and comfort, for me to grow and comfort, they will never coexist. And so I think it is perhaps, not just for women, for men, the most important lesson, because it will give you great comfort in taking on new challenges, and it will give you great comfort on dealing with nervousness or unease about anything that you do, because you will say, I know it, if you closed your eyes and I said, think of when did you ever learn the most in your life? What experience? I guarantee you'll tell me it was a time you felt at risk. And so I tell that story over and over because I believe in it so true, and I think most people I do. And so that would be, if I had, you know, like I had only 1 minute, that would have been my wish for everyone. This idea that to internalize that and be comfortable with the fact that growth and comfort don't coexist.
It's a great lesson to leave everyone with. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks.